Have you ever looked at your to-do list and felt absolutely nothing? Not motivation, not urgency, not excitement, just a strange heaviness, as if even the smallest task feels much further away than it should. Maybe you've opened the same email 3 times and still couldn't reply. Maybe you've stared at a pile of laundry that somehow feels as intimidating as climbing a mountain. Maybe you've spent an entire day telling yourself you should do something and then felt guilty when you couldn't. If you've been there, if you're there right now, then tonight I want to gently offer a possibility. What if you're not lazy? What if you're tired? More tired than you've allowed yourself to admit. More tired than anyone around you can see. More tired than you even realize. Because sometimes burnout doesn't arrive dramatically. It doesn't always look like collapsing from exhaustion. It doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it disguises itself. Sometimes it wears the mask of laziness. And maybe that's the reminder you need tonight. We live in a world that moves very quickly. There is always something to do, something to improve, something to respond to, something to worry about. Even when we rest, we often consume. Even when we stop working, our minds keep moving. Notifications, news, messages, expectations, goals, responsibilities. The modern mind rarely gets a chance to sit quietly. It's like a room where every light switch is turned on. Every fan is running. Every screen is glowing. Every sound is playing at once. Eventually, even the strongest system becomes overwhelmed. And yet when that happens, many of us don't think, I might be exhausted. We think, what's wrong with me? It's interesting how quickly we judge ourselves, especially when we're struggling, when energy disappears, when focus becomes difficult, when motivation feels distant. We often assume a character flaw: lazy, undisciplined, weak, unmotivated. But what if those labels aren't telling the whole story? Imagine someone carrying heavy grocery bags for miles. Eventually, their arms begin to shake. Their pace slows. They need a break. Nobody would look at them and say, clearly the problem is laziness. The burden would be obvious. The strain would make sense. But emotional burdens are harder to see. Mental burdens are invisible. Stress doesn't always leave bruises. Worry doesn't leave footprints. Responsibility doesn't always have a visible shape. And because we can't see what we're carrying, we sometimes forget we're carrying anything at all. Maybe you've been carrying more than you realize. Maybe you've been carrying anxiety. Maybe uncertainty. Maybe family responsibilities. Financial pressure. Loneliness. Grief. Heartbreak. Fear about the future. The pressure to keep everything together. The pressure to appear okay. The pressure to succeed. The pressure to keep going. One burden by itself may seem manageable, but burdens accumulate like stones quietly filling a backpack. One stone doesn't feel heavy, neither does 2 or 3. But eventually, the weight changes the way you move, the way you think, the way you feel, the way you show up in the world. And perhaps what you're calling laziness is actually the weight of too many stones. Burnout has a way of making simple things feel complicated. Things you used to do effortlessly suddenly require enormous effort. Replying to a text, making a phone call, cooking dinner, starting a project, cleaning a room, even making decisions can feel exhausting. Not because you've become incapable, but because your internal resources are running low. Imagine trying to drive a car with almost no fuel left. The car isn't broken. The engine isn't defective. It simply needs replenishment. Yet many of us treat ourselves differently. When our energy runs low, we don't offer understanding. We offer criticism. We tell ourselves to push harder, try harder, be better, do more. As though pressure alone can create energy. But pressure is not the same thing as fuel. And maybe that's worth sitting with for a moment. Pressure is not fuel. Many people spend years believing that if they criticize themselves enough, they'll become more productive. If they're hard enough on themselves, they'll finally change. If they feel guilty enough, they'll somehow create motivation. But guilt is heavy. Shame is heavy. Self-criticism is heavy. And carrying more weight rarely helps an exhausted person move more freely. Sometimes it does the opposite. There is a kind of exhaustion that sleep alone cannot fix. You may know this feeling. You sleep for 8 hours, maybe even 9, and still wake up tired. Not physically, emotionally, mentally. The kind of tiredness that settles deep inside. The kind that comes from being alert for too long, worried for too long, responsible for too long, strong for too long. Sometimes exhaustion doesn't announce itself in obvious ways. It doesn't always arrive as complete collapse. Sometimes it shows up quietly, as a growing distance between you and the things you normally care about. The book you haven't opened. The message you haven't answered. The task you've postponed for days. Even though part of you genuinely wants to do it. And that can be confusing, because from the outside, it may look like you're avoiding life. But from the inside, it often feels more like life has become heavier to carry. Many people spend so much time coping that they forget they're coping. They adapt to stress, adjust to pressure, push through difficult seasons, and little by little, what was once temporary begins to feel normal. The tension becomes familiar. The overwhelm becomes routine. The constant mental effort fades into the background like the sound of traffic outside a window. You stop noticing it, not because it's gone, but because you've learned to live around it. The challenge is that human beings can adapt to almost anything for a while. We can function while tired, keep going while overwhelmed, smile while struggling, and because we're still managing to get through the day, we convince ourselves that everything must be fine. But functioning and flourishing are not the same thing. Surviving and feeling well are not the same thing. Sometimes the ability to keep going hides just how depleted we've become. If you've been feeling stuck lately, perhaps the question isn't, why can't I do more? Perhaps the gentler question is, what has been asking so much of me? Because there is a difference. One question assumes failure. The other invites understanding. One turns your attention towards self-criticism. The other turns it towards self-awareness. And often, awareness is where healing begins. Imagine sitting beside someone you care deeply about. Someone who has been carrying responsibilities, worries, expectations, and disappointments for months, maybe years. You wouldn't immediately judge them for slowing down. You would probably understand why they're tired. You would recognize that effort can exist even when results aren't visible, that struggle can exist even when nobody else sees it. And maybe that's a perspective worth offering yourself tonight. As the day begins to settle, see if you can allow yourself a small moment of softness. Notice the air around you. the quiet corners of the room, the gentle rise and fall of your breathing. Nothing to solve right now, nothing demanding a perfect answer. Just this moment, just this pause. Tomorrow will arrive in its own time. The unfinished tasks will still be there. The questions will still be there. The responsibilities will still be there. But for now, you don't have to carry all of them at once. For now, it is enough to rest, enough to loosen your grip, enough to remember that needing recovery is not a character flaw. It is part of being human. And if you've been calling yourself lazy lately, maybe consider another possibility. Maybe you've simply been carrying more than anyone can see, maybe including yourself. And maybe tonight, instead of demanding more from yourself, you can offer yourself a little understanding, a little patience, a little grace. Sometimes that is exactly where the healing starts. Wherever you are right now, I'm glad you made it here. Thank you for listening, liking, and commenting. Please share Soul Planet with someone who you think may need it.